Hello, my name is Charlotte, and welcome to Tulaverse. Here I share stories for a white bird, white animal union. Today's story is about infinity and moving through a activated or alive infinity symbol. In my last story time, I shared about how I had created a place called Tula, and I was to finish and then pack it up with me and take it where I went next. And when I knew I was going to leave this place, I did one last thing. And that last thing was that I embedded into the outside of the door frame of the outside entrance of this glass storefront. I embedded a quote I heard maybe 10 years prior. And when I heard it, it just completely grabbed my spirit. And then I put it in a pocket in my heart, knowing I might reference it at some point later. And I embedded this quote. It is from a book called A Course in Miracles. And it says, if I remember the quote correctly, "Heaven is here. There is no other place. Heaven is now. There is no other time." And so I packed everything up, and all the energy I put into this place, and I took it somewhere where I went to build a couple of temples. And I went to build those temples in a tandemship with another person or partnership. And this person was masculine. So we had this perfect balance in the physical of masculine and feminine. And when the ground was cleared for this first temple, the day before, this person who was in partnership with me went and did some prayers before it was cleared. And then I let it rest a day. And the following day, I went and did ceremony there. And from that moment, I began to experience this, moving through a activated infinity symbol. And I began to see this outline in this Christ-like golden yellow energy. Christ light, golden yellow energy. And I saw it began to move clockwise. The left side of this wing, so to speak, and it formed, this outline. And this was happening over 2 months from the time the land was cleared until the time the temple was replanted in the ground. And I would go there many times a week and continue to do ceremony and experience this movement. And I would see it in my mind's eye, what was happening. And as I started to get closer to this center point, I began to experience this pulling back of energy that had been created in the left side of this wing, and it started to pull back and it started to deconstruct. And then I began, the closer I got to the center, was to experience this deconstructing of energy. And it seemed like almost like I was experiencing this evaporation of my physical body, which of course wasn't true in reality, but I was definitely experiencing this on another level. And the closer I got to the center point, the more my body would start to slow down. And it was in a process of maybe over 2 weeks where I would experience this slowing down more and more and more, almost like I was starting to move in slow motion. And I knew I arrived at the center, this center point, or what people call the 0 point, what I refer to as the place where one world ends and a new one begins, or the space between. And I knew I was arriving there when one day I woke up and it was almost as if my whole body went offline. And I tried to get up out of bed and it was like, oh my goodness. And I was picking up my legs and moving them to get off the bed. And there were stairs in front of me, and I would pick my leg up, one leg, and put it down and pick the other one up and move it down, trying to get down the stairs. And halfway down the stairs, I started to have a conversation with my body that, was like, okay, body, let's get back to remembering how to move. Legs, you need to start to move down the stairs. And when I got to the kitchen, I observed myself like having this suspended breath where it was like I wasn't experiencing like my lungs, moving out and in. And I don't know if this was, really happening in reality, but certainly at the moment I was standing there pondering and it seeming like my breath had suspended. And I began to talk to my lungs and say, okay, lungs, let's start pumping again. And I would take these inhalations and exhalations and start to get my lungs going again. And the best thing about creating in tandemship is you can talk to your partner about what you're experiencing. And I, from creating other things, know your body kind of is moving with it. So I have experienced different physical things happening to my body prior to doing this. And certainly he had too. And so we were both communicating and aware of what was happening, which is, so beautiful because you can talk about where to apply more pressure, where you're creating, and where to apply more light, and move through emotion together. And there were many layers to what was happening during this 2 months. And some of it I'm not going to share because it was very personal. But creation can only happen with shadow and light. So there was, this shadow aspect that was happening there. And like when I shared about creating Tula, which was my heaven, I say the beautiful aspects of it but, you know, there were the equal aspects in shadow. So when you're creating a heaven on earth, at least during that time when time wasn't as condensed, you know, the opposite energy was right there. And this is necessary for creation because the shadow, you know, creates the transmutation of it, creates this propulsion. I think that's a word, or it begins to get the light to move and will propel it to move it forward. And so while I was at this space between, I started to experience all this building up of this shadow energy and building up of what I had been processing during this time of this 2 months where I probably did not sleep at all. And this building. And one day I experienced in my energetic field, in my body, this like spontaneous combustion. And it was just like, boom, and I could see myself as I look in the physical, in the cosmos, and I could see this explosion happen of my body and my energy as if it was a big bang. And I heard that I was making way for others to do the same. And when that happened, this explosion, this Christ light energy started to move on the other side of this space between, and it started to move in a counterclockwise way. So it was making this outline in this form for where this energy was reconstructing. It was pushing out and reconstructing in this right side or right wing of this infinity symbol. So it was this deconstruction and reconstruction. And I began to hear that this is first creation, clockwise, and second creation, counterclockwise. First creation, second creation. And what's created in between this outline. And as we approach this day where these stones were planted in the ground, and we had been, working with monoliths and megaliths. This is what we were making this temple out of. And when you're working with stone of any size, I know I'm working with the ancients, ancient wisdom, ancient beings, ancient energy. And so it was why I think, this creation was particularly challenging. And it was as intense as it was beautiful, as dark as it was light. And the day that those stones were set, I took a picture, and I hope I can find it. If not, I have another one, but I will try to put the picture of the first sunset of this temple on the day these stones were replanted and reformed in the ground. And that is the story I have to share with you today about infinity. Through the wings of creation. Until our next story time, take care.